Welcome back, guys, to another episode on Misfit TV. This is the Buckets Only podcast, and I am your host, Jay. Jake is also on the podcast once again. Dynamic duo, back to problems. Jake, how are you feeling today? New scenery, new scenery.
Yes. I am nervous. Got a game 7 coming up. Um, let's go Clippers.
Hey, bro, look, and we're gonna leave the Clippers alone for us recording. This is actually the day that they are playing in Game 7 against the Denver Nuggets. We have decided, for the sake of Jake's heart condition of being a true diehard Clippers fan, not to even discuss Clippers activity today, just to make sure that we don't jinx his team, give his team the best opportunity to win. They seem to have a lot of stuff on their plate right now with Nikola Jokic having some crazy back-to-back games in Game 5 and 6. But instead, what we're going to talk about is some of the other big news in the NBA. Yes, we're down to like the last four teams pretty much. I mean, we're waiting on LA and Denver to make their move, but we're pretty much down to the wire in terms of the conference finals for both sides of the bracket. And a lot has transpired after round two. Um, Jake, the place that we're gonna start off first is we have seen a lot of coaches get the boot, say sayonara, hit the 1, 2, 3 Cancun already with guys like Nate McMillan and Brett Brown being relieved from their duties on their teams respectively. In the recent news, we've seen Mike D'Antoni of the Houston Rockets and Billy Donovan of the Oklahoma City Thunder both actually mutually agree with their team to part ways at the end of their runs this season. One, Jake, ain't it weird that these are the two teams that pretty much set the world on fire in round one, but we were just surprised that it even went to a Game 7? But then on top of that, it's just crazy that I genuinely believe that both of these guys are good coaches in this league. So first of all, what were your initial reactions to these two guys announcing that they're basically going to be moving away from their teams mutually?
The Mike D'Antoni one, I understand that. He's been their coach for a long time, and they haven't really done anything noteworthy in the postseason. He's, I mean, he needs a change of scenery. He is not. I don't think they should have traded Clint Capella. I think he definitely had a role in that. Um, so that one is not as surprising to me. I think it'll be good for Houston to get a fresh start. The Oklahoma City one, that's kind of a head scratcher. I feel like Billy Donovan would have been gone if they had had a bad season, as almost everyone predicted them to have. And then they made the playoffs, and they took the Rockets to 7 games in the first round, which even in the playoffs, not many people had them going to 7 games in the first round. So that one is surprising. I think Billy did a really good job. Um, so I don't think they fired him. I think he's mutually like I think they parted ways, like you said, where he's just kind of moving on by himself. But yeah, it's a head scratcher. I think he was. I think the future was looking brighter than it ever has been with all their draft assets and Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and Steven Adams and CP3, who they can either trade for more assets or they can use him to mentor Shea even more.
We look at Mike D'Antoni, who, similar to Brett Brown, I would say with the squads that they have, underachieved for the kind of teams that they had built around him. At least two superstars per team in terms of Brett Brown. He had Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. Granted, he was down a guy in terms of not having Ben Simmons this past postseason. But this is a guy who hasn't really been able to get them over the hump and has kind of this track record, so to speak, of being out coached. Then you look at Mike D'Antoni, similar situation. Two superstar guards in James Harden, Russell Westbrook on the same team, doesn't seem to adjust well to what other teams does. Very committed to his style of the small ball, shooting the three at a crazy clip, and basically trying to actually I may maybe in a certain way try to outthink other teams and maybe making things a little bit more difficult than they actually need to be. And then on the other end, looking at a guy like Nate McMillan, who I mean, name the superstar in Indiana. I understand Victor Oladipo did have a little bit of a participation in this year's playoffs, but I mean, the guy was coming off an injury that had him out for majority of the year. No Sabonis. Malcolm Brogdon is at the lead of a lot of activism off the court, but I wouldn't say that he's their best player. I wouldn't say that's the guy I want leading your team in a playoff series. And then after that, no bubble TJ to be found against the Miami Heat, and Miles Turner still has a big step that needs to be taken as a big guy. Similar to, we're talking about a team that did not have any superstars really and made it to the playoffs. Then we go to Billy Donovan in OKC. He has a similar situation to the Indiana Pacers. 0.02% of making the playoffs. Odd makers gave them 0.02% of making the postseason coming into this year. They not only make the playoffs, they're they're on the top end of the seeding. And on top of that, they pushed the Houston Rockets to a game 7 that they have no business even being in. So it's really interesting to see how all these coaches, their dynamics kind of contrast with each other, and how they also kind of lead you to wonder where it is that they could end up next. So Jake, let's start with Mike D'Antoni for a second. Where do you think is the best fit for him with some of the job positions that have opened up?
I could see him in Oklahoma City replacing Billy Donovan. If you look at the similarity of the teams, I mean, D'Antoni, he coached a team with dominant small ball guards in Russ and Harden. And then you look at Oklahoma City, and they also have some blooming and established like guards that they can rely on in Shea, CP3, and Dennis Schroeder. And so I think it would be an easy transition for D'Antoni to kind of move into that position if Oklahoma is looking in that direction, just because of the team that D'Antoni had in Houston, and then the team that he can have is similar parts in, and especially with his similar familiarness with Chris Paul, having coached him in Houston. Now, there's kind of questions about how they ended on terms, so I don't know, that might mean that they either don't hire D'Antoni or they trade away Chris Paul if that relationship can't be salvaged. But I could see D'Antoni being a good piece to the puzzle in Oklahoma City.
And honestly, I agree with you. That was the team that I was going to lean on. And it's kind of interesting that your reasoning was what it was, because my reasoning, honestly, is because there's a part of me that wonders whether or not Mike D'Antoni needs not only a change of scenery because of just being a part of the Houston organization for what, like the last dang near decade at this point. It's been at least, I want to say, 6 to 7 years that he's been around, because they had Kevin McHale early on in James Harden's tenure. But you throw on top of that, I don't know, Jake. There's a question as to whether Mike D'Antoni needs a break from the expectations as well. I mean, it's been championship or bust, but at least I would say bare minimum the last 3 to 4 seasons in particular. Ever since James Harden really started to grow into an MVP caliber player on a season to season basis, it's been, you got to win the whole thing. And, Mike D'Antoni has already been a coach that, with his, I'll say, unique style of play that he promotes, already has kind of had a little bit of an asterisk next to his name as, is he really a great coach, or is he just one of those guys who abuses a 82 game regular season with a play style that a lot of teams are going to want to play up to?
In a one game series, which is a regular
Exactly.
season series, teams are not going to want to adjust.
Exactly. And that's kind of my thing, is just, the question is, with an OKC team, tons of draft picks, a lot of young potential on their team, not only just in the possible incoming draftees, but also guys that they already have on their team. I you come to wonder whether or not Mike D'Antoni just wants to settle down with a team with lesser expectation, more of a rebuilding mindset, and wants to lean into more of a role of being the underdog overachiever rather than being the heavily favorited underachiever. And I mean, it's one of those things that I really think is a question to him and what his philosophy is moving forward. But I honestly agree with you. I think OKC, if that's what he's looking for, I think he gets the best of both worlds because his system does to a certain extent fit what they have. Their small ball lineup was the most efficient lineup in the league this year. And that kind of plays into his wheelhouse. But I also think that moving forward with a team that is building off of a ton of draft capital, that it might kind of take the championship aspirations off of his belt a little bit, which might give him a little bit of a chance to decompress after having to be in the hunt. On the other end, Billy Donovan, the OKC coach, uh, I mean, this is a guy that we've really only seen 1 year of him without a superstar leading the helm, and that was this season. And call it overachieving, call it great coaching. I think that he definitely was in discussion for coach of the year with the way that he performed this year as bringing this team up to play and bringing them out every night as a competitive squad. With that being the case, we didn't really see him as being a coaching free agent this offseason. Yet here we are. So where do you think he best fits, or where do you think he should go?
I mean, they have the talent that he's used to playing or coaching. They have a bunch of really good players that they just have to figure out how the pieces fit. And then you look at Billy Donovan, a guy who, like you said, just coached his first year in the league without a dominant like superstar. So I think it would be really interesting to see if he could, because clearly Brett Brown was not able to make Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid work well together. I'd be interested to see if Billy Donovan was able to make that work, and if he was hired by them, what would he do with the remaining pieces with Al Horford, Tobias Harris? Would he try to trade them um, to a more like way of basketball that he like a basketball philosophy that he is like showing, or would he try to just kind of keep the pieces that they have and kind of mold the new team and see the new strategy? I'd be interested to see what he would do in Philly.
I mean, I don't hate the landing. I think my only concern about that is I do wonder just exactly what it is that Philly truly needs. This is a team that tends to trot out a Joel Embiid that we say the same thing every season. The guy has immense talent, but what's the same thing that everybody puts next to his name entering every season? The guy just does not seem to be in shape. The guy just does not seem to be there mentally all season. He'll have a game with 0 points, for example, earlier on in this regular season, and Shaq and Charles Barkley kill him for it on TNT. And then the next game coming out drops about 32 to 34 points, double-digit rebounds, and shows you why we would consider him as I'm gonna say top 5 center in the league. I'm sure that his potential makes him way better than that. But it's just from what he's displayed, especially in the postseason. I'm gonna say top 5 at the minimum. So it's one of those things where I do feel as though Philly needs a little bit more of a motivator. I I wonder if that's a Ty Lue. I wonder if that's one of these player coaches that we've heard about, like Chauncey Billups has been in the talks for certain positions in recent days. I think for Billy Donovan, the question for him is kind of similar to D'Antoni. Do you want to be a part of the underrated overachiever type of team in an area like maybe Indiana, for example? Do you want to go to something that is kind of completely rebuilding and be around something similar to um what you had in OKC to a certain extent in terms of like the Chicago Bulls, for example, who has a lot of young talent, good draft capital in their hands already, and kind of just needs guys to be able to put the pieces together. Or does he have to step on the scale step into this championship spotlight and take a swing at a team like you mentioned, the 76ers. So I think it really comes down to what he feels as though he wants and what kind of team he wants around him. I don't think anybody can go wrong with going to the Eastern Conference to look a little better than they might actually be. But yeah, man, I think Billy Donovan, he's probably gonna be with Nate McMillan saying that he's gonna take at least a year off from coaching. He might be one of the biggest free agent coach attractions that nobody's talking about that we might need to keep our eyes on. Moving on to our next big topic. I mean, come on now. You know we can't be in the conference finals of the NBA playoffs and not talk some Heat Celtics. So, Jake, this is the first time that these two teams are taking on each other in the Eastern Conference Finals since LeBron James was wearing the number 6 in Miami. Bro, first of all, where did Miami come from? And was it this obvious that the Celtics were going to make it despite having a little bit of a tough fight with Toronto? I mean, a tale of two different sides that we saw. The Celtics the Celtics kind of had to fight their way through to get to the Eastern Conference Finals in the first place, and Toronto definitely disrupted their flow. While on the other hand, the Miami Heat, who were kind of the underdog, dark horse team in the East, coasted all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals despite one little hiccup in Game 4. So, where do you stand on this conference finals? Who you got? How you got them?
I'm still sticking with the Celtics. I think even though Miami just bulldozed through Milwaukee, I honestly think Boston has more momentum at this point. Having just come off of a Game 7 victory against a very good defending champ Toronto Raptors team, despite losing Kawhi. They're one of the best coached, if not the best coached team in the league this year. Shout out Nick Nurse, who just signed a big contract extension today. Very well deserved. So Boston has more momentum being able to overcome a team like that in 7 games. They also are still kind of in their groove. They have played with each other recently, like within the past few days. Whereas Miami has had probably close to, if not more than a week off now since they last played. Um, and I just think Boston has gone through more adversity in the playoffs this year. They have more like experience of what they're up against. Whereas you look at Miami, um, Jimmy made it to the conference finals last year. He played really well for Philly. But I see the Celtics. I see Brad Stevens getting it done with the guys that they have. I think Gordon Hayward's going to be back at one point or at some point in this series. Um, but I think it's going to be a really good series. I mean, you have Jason Tatum. It's like the young team versus the established team in a way, where you have the Celtics who are also young like the Heat, but they are more established. They got guys like Jason Tatum. And then you have the Heat who kind of came out of nowhere with a bunch of these guys who you probably never heard of until a few games into the season when they were dropping big points and putting up stats and winning games. And it'll be a really good series. I'm excited.
I mean, honestly, I agree with you with the Celtics, but you took the words right out of my mouth, Jake. Honestly, the two words that I was leaning on going into this series is momentum and adversity. See, the comparison that I've made to other people is when it comes to the Heat's run, I see a lot of Golden State's first run to the championship in this little run that they've made. If you remember in Golden State's first championship run, they took on pretty much all Western Conference teams with injured point guards that year. They were down essentially maybe not their best player in certain aspects, but they were down the point guards, and that has a lot to do with your ability to run the offense. And they took them out. I mean, granted, they were the more talented team. I would say, but when you got that little bit of a handicap, it makes it a little bit easier to handle business. Then you get to the NBA Finals, no Kyrie, no Kevin Love, takes out pretty much LeBron James by himself. It was like him with Boobie Gibson all over again. And when I look at the Miami Heat, You take on an Indiana Pacers team that's missing Sabonis, who had an all-star year this season, a battered down, still needs to get his court legs version of Victor Oladipo. I mean, a watered down version of Bubble TJ that we pretty much didn't see once the playoffs started. Then you get over to round two and you catch the Milwaukee Bucks right in the midst of coming off of the Jacob Blake situation. You get a injured Giannis Antetokounmpo coming down the stretch to the point where he wasn't even able to play in game 5 and didn't get to finish game 4 in a game that we pretty much thought they were going to get closed out if it were not for Chris Middleton probably having the game of his life. So we're talking about a run that now the difference between this run versus Golden State's is now you have the Boston Celtics who have come strapped. Now, as you said beforehand, they could be bringing back Gordon Hayward in this series, but say they don't. I don't feel like that's hit their ego by any stretch because really all that's done is given Marcus Smart more minutes. And all that's done is prove more and more as to why he was first team all defense this year. Just in his way, his ability to be able to show, I mean, just his play in game 6 and 7, I felt like has really kind of proved his establishment as one of the top defensive players in the league. But we see Jace Tatum go crazy. Kemba Walker, shoot, he's in his first ever playoffs, playoff postseason, let alone his first Eastern Conference Finals. Jaylen Brown has had a tremendous postseason so far, and we've seen a lot of guys step up for them right now. So they're not playing a handicap team this time. They are playing a group of guys who have been playing pretty great basketball since even before the NBA restart happened. And now they're battle tested. Jeez, bro, I don't know. When it comes to the Celtics, I'm not gonna take them handily, but I would say they get it done in 6 just because I just feel like they're the better overall team. Scary pick to make when we've basically been saying that about any team playing Miami dang near all year, but I think the Celtics are just the team to kind of knock the Heat off their high horse, and I think Paul Pierce gets a little bit of revenge against Dwayne Wade and their little bet that they got going on. Um, Moving on to our final topic, probably the biggest topic that we have today is the state of the Milwaukee Bucks. Jake, we got a little bit of news this week that Giannis Antetokounmpo has had a discussion with the front office, and they've made it clear that they're open to going into the luxury tax to bring in more help for him. We've heard names like CP3 be thrown out. We've heard certain teams like the Lakers, the Rockets, the Clippers, Golden State, all the Miami Heat, all teams potentially vying for a Giannis Antetokounmpo that is pretty much 1 year away from being an unrestricted free agent if he is not to re-sign the Supermax beforehand. This is a team that at one point their best player was Michael Redd. Kids who don't know who Michael Redd is, you can go look him up on YouTube at your own time. But this was a guy who averaged 20 points and didn't really get them much of anywhere. Now they get a guy who is considered a generational talent and one of the top 3 to 5 players in the NBA, and they could potentially lose him in free agency if they don't make a move. So Jake, dying question that all people are wondering right now when it comes to the Bucks. What's up with Giannis? What is it? What do you think he does?
I think they need to trade him. I think OKC has kind of set the blueprint and showed that it is possible to still compete after trading 2 stars. Granted, this is Giannis, who is a superstar, much better than Russ and PG were for OKC. Um, but I don't see them. First off, Chris Paul is not the answer. Spending over the luxury tax means nothing if you go out and trade for a 38-year-old player making $45 million a season. No disrespect to CP3, but his age, the thing he can't really control. He's old. He's getting older by the day, by the month, by the year, he's not the answer. Um, and it would mean they would definitely have to trade Chris Middleton, who I don't know if that's in their best interest because they need that shooting so that Giannis can kick it out if his driving stalls. Um, I don't. I mean, I think they got to trade him. I think all the top teams that want him have the pieces to get him. I think the Bucks can get a much better return package early on. Um, because here's another thing that if they trade him before the season starts, teams are getting him for an entire season, so they're willing to give up more to get him. If they trade him, let's say at the trade deadline, if things aren't going right and they don't think they're going to win a championship and they don't want to lose him for nothing, they're going to get less because teams are only getting him for a few months guaranteed because no one knows where he's going to re-sign with next summer. Um, so I think it's in Milwaukee's best interest to try to, at least for now, at least to scope out the trade, like the trade market, kind of see who they can get. Like you said, you got teams like the Warriors who have like the number 3 overall pick, um, number 2 overall pick. They have Andrew Wiggins. They have Klay Thompson, who maybe they're not willing to part with, but they have Draymond Green. Like they have a ton of pieces that the Bucks can trade for and still stay competitive while also rebuilding and collecting assets for the future. So yeah, I think Milwaukee. I think if they can't get another star player, which I don't see how they do, I think it's in their best interest to move on.
So when we talked about this off camera, you caught me completely off guard by leaning into that. And honestly, the more you explain it, the more I actually kind of am in favor of the idea. So let's just say you definitely sold me well, because the way that I look at things now, right? And I think that we kind of saw this. There's a tale of two different teams, similar circumstances in ways that we can kind of weigh this entire situation with Giannis. The first one that you brought up was Oklahoma City. That's a team that pretty much, if we're going to be real, was still built off of young players. There was a lot of veteran sprinkles in there with guys like CP3 to be able to mentor. Dennis Schroeder, I still consider as a young guy, honestly, and was up for six man of the year this year. Danilo Gallinari is established in this league. And of course, there's guys like Steven Adams and Andre Roberson who came in late come, NBA bubble time. But there's a lot of guys on their team that are young and kind of need to be built up. We saw that Lugens Dort is a guy that if he can put up, more consistent numbers offensively, he could be a player for them. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander is a guy who basically improved in every statistical category this year after being on a team more centralized around the guards overall, rather than coming from a Clippers team that kind of was a collective unit that still kind of almost leaned more on their bench than their starting unit and on the team that he was on. Darius Baisley is a guy who CP3 talked like extremely high about throughout the bubble, and he's a guy that I think is going to get a lot of run for them. Terrence Ferguson, Hamidou Diallo, they have guys to say the least, not to mention their crazy draft capital. The Milwaukee Bucks could potentially, if acquiring the right type of assets in a similar situation, could run out a pretty good team. We've seen Mike Budenholzer dominate the regular season and almost low-key do it with less. We saw that 60-win season he had with the Atlanta Hawks where he had 5 All-Stars. And goodness gracious, I don't know if, Paul Millsap and those guys and Kyle Korver and all those guys were quote-unquote All-Stars that year. But I mean, the team was just so unstoppable during the regular season that you almost couldn't hope. You couldn't fight them all being voted in. And then you look another level, a deeper level, and you take a look at a team like the Pelicans, who had almost a similar situation with Anthony Davis. And although I think they might have missed out a little bit in terms of, I think the cherry on top they were waiting for was getting Kyle Kuzma as a part of this trade, they still got a lot of haul. I mean, a ton of haul. I
And they
mean,
were
they were
considered one of the best young teams in the league.
exactly. And although they have a coaching vacancy as well with the fact that they got rid of Alvin Gentry, which was extremely interesting, but, nonetheless, They have crazy building blocks with Zion Williamson obviously being at the top of that list. But Lonzo Ball is a guy we are waiting on. But I think if he arrives, he makes them dangerous. Brandon Ingram commands a lot of money this offseason if they are to re-sign him, and he can be a really good player for them. I still think guys like Josh Hart and Jackson Hayes at center for them and guys like that are going to be huge. And they retained pretty much all of that just through that one transaction to get send Anthony Davis to LA. So in a sense,
And also for
you
a
know,
1 year rental, for a 1 year
right.
rental that you
Similar,
can go
right. Similar circumstances. Similar circumstances to Milwaukee in terms of your proposal that they trade prior to the season starting to maximize, similar to how the Pelicans did, maximize as much of that capital as they can to build that quote unquote OKC team with New Orleans Pelicans logic, basically. So let's put all of this together in a grand scheme, Jake, and kind of sum it up in a really good way with a question. The main teams that Giannis has been linked to in recent days, but also in recent seasons, has mainly been the Golden State Warriors and the Miami Heat. Now, obviously, we know like the easy choice is like, dude, send them to the Warriors. Hopefully, they don't have to give up Clay. Send them to the Warriors. But realistically speaking, with the type of draft capital that the Warriors have, in conjunction to the Miami Heat, who have guys on their team right now producing, who do you think has the best quote unquote deal on the table potentially for Milwaukee to make a trade if they were to make a preseason trade heading into 2021?
from Milwaukee's perspective, I
Mhm.
would say that Golden State can place a better offer. They have the ready to win now players in Clay or Draymond or Andrew Wiggins. And then they also have like the immediate draft capital. They have the second overall pick, like we said before. They have the pieces that Milwaukee could use right now to really fast track their rebuild if they were to go that route. Whereas the Heat, they'd be getting a lot of role players. I don't believe they have very much in the way of draft assets. I think they traded a lot of their assets in recent years. So I believe they're kind of depleted in that sense. So yeah, I'd say the Golden State has the better, more appealing offer for Milwaukee right now.
I think it really just depends on who Miami feels is expendable for a Giannis level trade. If Milwaukee can get a guy like Tyler Hero, if Milwaukee can get a guy like Duncan Robinson, maybe Kendrick Nunn, and a pick, hard to say no to young talent that's already had playoff experience coming from a championship culture. Hard to argue with. My one caveat where I can kind of agree with you in terms of Golden State is Andrew Wiggins is a really nice trade chip that still gives Milwaukee a star is starting to become a stretch with Andrew over the last couple of years, but he's definitely a all-star caliber player when playing up to potential. And that number 2 overall pick is very convincing. In a draft that is more deep than it is talented, I would say, having a top 2 overall pick in this year's draft class that feels like a 3 draft rate, a 3 draft prospect race with James Wiseman, Anthony Edwards, and LaMelo Ball, being in that top 3 is a really good start to trying to turn your franchise around when you have to make that type of exchange. Similar to the Pelicans, who, granted, got the number 1 overall pick going into that trade, but was also able to get the number 4 overall pick from the Lakers and flip it into 2 other picks from the Atlanta Hawks. I gotta lean with Golden State just because that pick entices me a lot. But shoot, if Miami's willing to part with Tyler Hero, a Milwaukee bred kid, and then get a backcourt mate and Duncan Robinson and maybe Kendrick Nunn in the fray of it, I don't know. I think the Bucks got some options. They might need to get it on the phone with ASAP. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Giannis moving forward, just because there's a lot of different ways that this can go. Can they trade him? Should they trade him? Do they get him a partner? Is somebody like Chris Middleton next on the books after seeing them give up Malcolm Brogdon and see what that did to them after watching Eric Bledsoe pretty much underachieve? There's a lot of different routes that this can go. So I think that's going to be a great way to kind of transition into the question of the day. And I gave this a lot of thought coming into this part of the segment in particular. My question of the day to you guys is, what do you guys think is the best route for Giannis? Is it for him to stay in Milwaukee, sign the Supermax, and stick it out? Is it to request a trade and potentially put his name in the hat for potentially ending up on a team like Golden State, the Clippers, maybe the Lakers, or even the Miami Heat? Or is his best route to wait till that 2021 offseason hits, go out as a free agent, and test the waters himself based on the teams that have the money? So leave it in the comments down below. Definitely want to see what you guys say about that, because Giannis is probably the hottest commodity that's still under contract right now, which is crazy. So I'm really interested to see what you guys say. So Jake, it's been another fire episode, my guy. Only bangers around here on the Buckets Only podcast. For you guys who enjoy our content, remember, like, comment, and subscribe. Check us out on Instagram. A lot of heat coming out. We got stuff with the Culture Blitz podcast for football. Fantasy football is bumping. Week 1 is pretty much through and through. Moving on to week 2, and things are only moving up from here. So check us out on social media. And we're just gonna keep bringing the bangers. So Jake, it's been a real one, my guy. We guys will catch you on the next one.